Hello everyone and welcome to another video with me, 320 Sim Pilot, and today we're taking a look at another fantastic new feature for the fly-by-wire A32NX in Microsoft Flight Simulator. This is the addition of nose wheel steering control. So instead of just using our rudders to taxi around like a general aviation aircraft, we now have the nose wheel steering tiller. They've done some great work getting this to work in the simulator because it's not really set up for it, so they found some great workarounds. So in this video I'm going to show you how to set it up and then how to use it and what it's used for in real life. So I'll give you some extra context as ever to compare it with what we do in the real world, and why nose wheel steering is actually a really important feature to have, and all of the ways that we interact with it during our day-to-day flying work. I'll be using the latest development build of the fly-by-wire A32NX, which now includes this. And of course, I need to say a great big thank you to the fly-by-wire team for putting this together. And also, I will put a link in the description to the document that they provide to describe how to set it up. It's a really great document that explains a lot of things, including a bit of background on this system. We'll be taxiing out from here at Heathrow, so let's get started. So here we are on the flight deck, and the first thing we need to do is set it up in the flypad. So I'm going to turn that on, and what we're going to need to do is go to the settings menu and enable a separate axis for the tiller. So down here we go to settings, and then it's in sim options, and then separate tiller from rudder inputs, or separate tiller from rudder inputs. Not sure which way around it's supposed to be pronounced, but there we go. Anyway, so we're going to have the ability to use the nose wheel steering tiller. So we click enabled on that, and then that's all we need to do in here, as far as I'm aware. That's what I had to do, and then into the menus. So in assistance options, we need to make sure that we have turned off the auto rudder. So this is under piloting controls, and you need auto rudder off, which we have got. Good news. Let's go now to control options, and we need to assign the axes. So I'm going to assign this to my TCA Copilot joystick, and then what I'm going to do is go down to the all. Obviously, it's not assigned yet, and then it's going to be in power management mixture, and we need mixture axes. And let me just check I get the right one. It is mixture axes 4 minus 100 to 100%. So mixture axes 4, which is up here, minus 100 to 100%. And then I'm going to assign this to my twist axes on my Thrustmaster TCA, which is right axis Z. And just to check it, there it goes, left and right. So that is now running. I'm going to apply and save that. Whilst I'm here, I also want to assign the water rudder input. So I've assigned the water rudder toggle button to button 6, which is the right sort of engine fire light, is what it is on the real aircraft. And that way we can use that to rudder pedal disconnect, which is going to be important later. So toggle water rudder and your mixture minus 100 to 100%, and then we should be set up and ready to go. Something I've discovered, make sure reverse axes, which was ticked by default on mine, make sure that's not ticked or it won't make much sense. So I'm going to have it so reverse is unticked, which makes the most sense. And now in the cockpit, I can see in a powered up airplane that when I twist the joystick, it twists the handle, which is good news. So that means the tiller is assigned, which is what we wanted. So first of all, we're going to look at the ECAM memo messages with regards to the nose wheel steering. When we push back the aeroplane, at the moment the hydraulic systems are depowered, so we have no pressure. Green, blue and yellow have no pressure. We use a hydraulic system to power the nose wheel steering. You can actually see I've managed to use up some of the accumulator. So what that means is when we push back and we power up the hydraulics like this, the nose wheel steering system will become powered through the yellow or green system via the PTU, etc. Now, we don't want that to be the case whilst we're pushing back and connected to a tug, because if we are, we'll find that when we power up, let's say we were at an angle, let's say the pushback tug is trying to push us onto this taxiway behind over here, as we power up, or as the engines power the hydraulic system as they're turning on, it will try and snap the wheels straight. And that is incredibly damaging. You'll damage the tug, you'll damage the aircraft. There's a lot of reasons we don't want that to happen. Very, very dangerous. There's some aircraft that are more prone to this than others due to their design, but the Airbus is pretty good for it. And the reason is we will be looking for a disconnect message when we go to push back. So let me call the tug, and when it connects, that should call it there. And you'll see we get nose wheel steering disconnect message, which is exactly what we want to see. So what this means is there's a little pin outside that and a little lever that the ground crew will put into the nose gear, and that will disconnect the nose wheel steering. And that means that even with the hydraulic powered, you have no control over that nose wheel. It's just free car string, and they can twist and turn it as they want whilst the engines start. But it's very important, before start checklists will include this often, to make sure that the ground crew have connected it properly and haven't forgotten it, because if they forget it and we push back, you've got real problems. After engine start, you'll see the ground crew wave at the flight crew. You might see it as a passenger as well. They usually wave with a flag in their hand, a little red pin saying removed before flight. And what they'll be waving is this pin that they've used to do this, to tell the flight crew that that is indeed done and that they've removed it and that the airplane will now taxi. So here we are on the outside of the aircraft, and this is the nose gear, and it is this little box here that is used by the ground crew to control the nose wheel steering and make sure that it's disconnected for when they push back. This little light is the parking brake light. So whilst the parking brake is on, that light is on, and that way the ground crew knows not to push us back without damaging the gear. Because of course, if the brakes were on, they'd just end up damaging the nose gear or the tug. Something to note here is once one engine is running, like it is now, you'll see that the nose wheel steering disconnect message goes into amber. Let me just stop the pushback. And what happens there is the airplane knows that it's a problem to have a taxiing airplane without any nose wheel steering. So it goes into amber after the first engine is running, so that you know that you need to get rid of it. And this will be picked up in the after start checklist. We'll obviously be looking on this section of the eCam for any messages like that. So that is the Airbus is again a clever way of reminding us there's a problem. So if you see amber, your eyes are just drawn to it straight away, and you go, "Oh, hold on, this isn't right. We need to get that sorted." Now it's a real problem if that message is there and you look over here and the ground crew are over here. Very hard to communicate with them because they'll have disconnected the headset by then. But anyway, there we go. So we'll get rid of the ground crew and have the other engine running. Also worth noting, you can of course taxi on single engine because we'll taxi on the system, on engine number 1 powers the green hydraulic system, and you'll have nose wheel steering powered by that. But there is also the option to have it running through the PTU and other things. So this isn't a hydraulics lesson. This is a nose wheel steering. But there we go. They should disconnect, and then we'll see this message disappear. And what will happen is, there you go, message is gone. Ground crew will then walk off, and then they'll wave that pin that they'd plugged into that box earlier to keep the nose wheel steering from accidentally connecting. They'll wave it at you so that you know that the airplane will be able to steer. Okay, it is time for us to taxi. This isn't a lesson on flows either, or lights or anything like that. So yeah, there may be a few errors in what I've done, but this is just to show you how the airplane behaves on the ground. So now what I'm going to do is release the parking brake. You'd obviously check it's clear left and right, and we'll get the airplane moving. The Airbus does ever so slightly roll away, even at idle power and in the Neo, but less so than the older engines where it used to run away quite easily. So we'll just spool them up a bit, do a bit of a brake check, which has worked. Ideally, don't come to a stop when you do that. And let's try out our tiller. So there you go. Now we are turning using that nose wheel tiller. Look at that. And you'll see how quickly it can turn, or how sharply, I should say, it can turn. It's not immediately responsive. Look at that. If I hold it right, it takes a while for the nose to swing round. Now this is my first time trying it out, and I've got to say that is pretty spot on. That's really, really nice. It makes such a difference. It stops it feeling like a go-kart. The reason is the Airbus does have a bit of lag as you taxi it, so it doesn't just immediately respond instantly. So you can see, if I keep that tiller in view, you can see that I'm having to just move it and then expect it to move. It does take a bit of time. So there is of course lag. Why is that? Well, it's a big heavy airplane trying to turn on just that little nose wheel. But crucially, it is a steering by wire. There's no hydraulic connection between that handle and the nose wheel steering. It is electronic signals that are sent to the airplane. So that is then obviously using all sorts of algorithms and so on is sent into the abyss of the computers, and then they work out how to steer the nose. So there is a little bit of delay to it. You get used to it, but yeah. First officer has one as well, so there is a tiller on both sides, which you can control in the real aircraft. If you use them both at the same time, it will add up the input. So if you both put half deflection, it will simply go to full deflection. So you have to be very careful. We never have both of us driving at once, ever, in the air or on the ground. It's just a recipe for an accident. Great. Next step to talk about is how much steering do we get? Well, it's this is from Fly-by-Wire's excellent documents on it, actually. I don't know these numbers off by heart, but it's 75 degrees, it turns out, from the nose wheel steering. So 75 degrees. But you also get a bit of steering from the rudder pedals. So if I use the rudder pedal, look at that, I can just about move the airplane around a turn. Now this is accurate. In the real aircraft you can do this. This is known, some people call it fine steering or rudder steering, whatever you want to call it. That's maximum there, you see. So it doesn't have enough. At 10 knots, I'm going to miss this turn. So let's swing it around here and get onto the straight. Good stuff. So what is going on here? Why do we have it with the rudder? Well, it's used for takeoffs and landings primarily. When you use the rudders, you get a little bit of steering, but not too much. That way, you can use it on the takeoff roll when you're at low speed and there's not enough air going over the rudder at the back. You have a bit of nose wheel steering. So it's very useful at the start of the takeoff roll. That's primarily how you're controlling the angle of the aircraft as it starts rolling. By the time you're getting up to 80, 100 knots, that's becoming less effective and more of the force is coming from the rudder itself. And then by the time, by the time you're at 130 knots, they'd be in trouble for that one. By the time you're at 130 knots, it's removed altogether and you're using entirely aerodynamic forces. But by that point, it's doing almost nothing anyway. So that's what the nose wheel steering is doing with the rudder pedals. So whilst we're taxiing, if we're going in a straight line, and I have done a video on these speeds before, but just to remind you, in a straight line, about 30 knots is a typical maximum. If you want to do turns, like wider turns like this maybe, that would be about 15 knots-ish. If you're going to do sharper turns, about 10 knots. So turn like this, you can see there 11 knots. That's probably the most you want to be because this is effectively a 90-degree turn. So 10 knots would be a good speed for 90-degree turns. And you've got to think as well, if you've got crew who are standing up doing safety demonstrations in the back, they of course could be right back here. So that swings around quite a lot when you start steering the airplane, especially with the quite aggressive steering available using the tiller. Something else to remember, if it's wet outside, for goodness sake, you're going to have to slow down more than that. It is going to slide around on the painted lines like mad. The Airbus and most aircraft are not designed to be on the ground particularly. So you've got all that weight. You could have 80 tons all having to turn through this little nose wheel. And if one of those wheels sits on the painted line, then it will just slide around. So parking on stands and so on, very important that you have it nice and slow, especially in the wet. When you're entering a stand, you're looking at 5 knots realistically and then slowing down from there. So 30 knots in a straight line, 15 knots for sort of wide turns, 10 knots for tighter turns, 5 knots for coming on stand, just as a very rough guide. So why is all of that important? Well, when we're going in a straight line at 30 knots or even 20 knots, or any straight line, you can just use your feet and it's finer steering, so you get more precise control because we've got quite a large amount of rudder travel you can see there to maneuver ourselves around. So let's do a U-turn here actually. But yeah, you've got quite a lot of space to move it, so you can actually be a bit more gentle, and that's just more comfortable for the passengers. If you're using the tiller at 30 knots, making large corrections, you'll just be swinging around, and you'll feel it at the front and the back of the airplane. But like I say, especially at the back, with the way the airplane is designed. So yeah, tiller for the slower stuff, but if you're running at high speed or in relatively straight lines, using the rudder pedals can be quite nice. Next up, I want to talk about that disconnect, rudder pedal disconnect thing. Why did we assign that button? Well, that is talking about this pedal disconnect, this little button up here. This is sort of something that you can put your palm on. So your fingers will be around the grip here, then your palm over this area. So what we do is we will, when it comes to flight control check time, we'll need to move the rudder fully left and fully right. Now there's obviously an issue with that because if I move the rudder like this, even with the small amount of steering it gets, the airplane starts to go left and right. So if you're doing anything at a reasonable speed, you'll find that is still far too much, so it's no good at all. But we need to check that the rudder moves fully, so how do we do it? Well, that's when we can use the disconnect. So I'm going to try it out now. Let's see if it works. So I'm going to press disconnect on my controller. So something I've discovered with the way the auto rudder button works for the pedal disconnect. You have to hold it down. It's not a toggle. You have to hold it down. So I'm going to hold down the button, and I'm going to hold it for a few seconds, but you'll notice that I'm still getting a bit of rudder steering, but then a second later, whilst I hold it, it does cut out. So there we go, full right rudder. And then if we go left, it does go left, and then it cuts out and it goes full left rudder. So all the while I've been doing that, I've been holding that button, and it is initially turning a bit and then it cuts out. So it does work functionally. That's not quite how the real aircraft has it. So in the real aircraft, as soon as you press that button, the rudder pedals no longer have any control over the nose wheel steering, and you can do your flight control check freely. So it does work to some extent. I know that there's issues with the flight simulator setup, and they've worked incredibly hard to get around it. So they've done a great job because it does work, but there is still a slight turn initially, at least what I'm getting. But still, that is now an available option, which is great news. So that's what we use that for, so we can do our flight control checks whilst taxiing. Just wanted to share this very pretty view with you that Microsoft Flight Simulator is giving us. Always impressive. But as you can see, screaming along at 24 knots, no way we can take this turn. We've got to get the aeroplane slowed down. 50 knots would be the maximum I'd go in dry, but realistically, this is quite a tight turn. 9 knots. So, another question. Do we use full lock all the time? No, it's rare. We can use full lock where you fully twist the tiller, but it's very aggressive, so we don't tend to use that. The times you'll use that is if you're taxiing out of an apron where you are right next to the terminal and you're not being pushed back. So there are stands called self-maneuvering stands where you'll taxi the airplane off yourself. Things like that, you'll end up using potentially full lock of the tiller. And again, it's amazing how good that system is, how the Airbus can really turn on the spot. But overall, amazing work by Fly-by-Wire. This is an excellent addition, and it really gives the airplane the weight that we've been looking for on the ground whilst taxiing around. Right, let's get going. So, starting the clock, half side stick forward, 50% N1. And as we said, this initial part of the takeoff roll, we are primarily using we are only using our feet, and that's true on landing as well. There is no nose wheel steering tiller used whilst rolling on the runway for takeoff or landing. There's absolutely no need for it, and you can even get a good start at vacating without it. It's only when you're down at taxi speed that you'll use that tiller. Right, and here's our V1 rotate. Up we go. All done with the rudder. It's more than adequate. Positive climb, gear up. Nav. So that's all for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it's been useful and interesting for you. And as ever, as I said, thank you to the Fly-by-Wire team. This is a great piece of work, and hopefully this has given you some extra context on how that is used in real-world flying day to day and the importance of this system. There'll be plenty more videos, guides and live streams coming to the channel, so do please subscribe if you'd like to see more. Otherwise, we'll see you again in another of those videos or live streams soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.